Hey, good morning everybody, this is Juice, and today's video is going to be about short field ground school. This is going to be part one of a two-part series I'm going to do. The second part's going to be about actual flying and technique, and I'll talk it through the air with the controls indicator on. But this part one is going to be about the academics, and I've created some slides for you guys. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm not a flight instructor. I'm just a regular pilot with about 20 years experience. I'm using my practical experience and experience that I gained from flight instructors during my training and pilots that are instructors that I still fly with today. But most of this is going to apply to DCS World, and these are success tips that I have found that work, that are based off of some of the real world training I've done and what DCS will allow us to do. So when in doubt, this applies to DCS, not to the real world. So today we're going to use Pagan airstrip. I know you guys have seen the teasers that I've put out over the last couple of weeks, but I decided that this is a really good airstrip to train on, and we're going to use Pagan airstrip on the Marianas Island map. We got about 1,900 feet of runway to work with. I've measured this out on the usable surface that we have, that you basically can fly off of without damaging the airplane, and it's right at about 1,900 feet, give or take a little bit and everything. Now when you fly over this, let's say you're arriving here, you've been flying a long ways across the ocean, and you're arriving here to land, and this is your end destination, and you look at it from the air, you can't really tell it, but there's a lot of factors that are going to affect your landing and your takeoff here, and that's why I love using this airstrip, because it's got a lot of challenges that we can learn from. The airstrip, as you go around it and fly around it, if you do have a chance to arrive via air first before you take off from it, you'll notice right away that there are challenges in the slope. It does go from east to west kinda, and it's the runway there is sloped upward. So I have flown on a lot of airfields in Northern California, that a lot of friends' private airstrips with my small Cessna, and there are a lot of one-way in, one-way out airfields, and this one wouldn't really constitute that. I've actually shown in the video that you can take off and land in both directions, but you know, when you're practicing this, it's always a good idea to lower the fuel state and do it by yourself. Don't take any heavy passengers in it, because you want to get as much performance during the practice and training. You want to get that feel. Now when you're down on the ground, it's even harder to see the slope, but you can look at this. This is taking off towards the west, and this right here shows the upslope a little bit, and there's also a little bit of rise and hump there in the runway to my right, but then at the end of the runway you have uplifting terrain or rising terrain to contend with. And in a short field landing, I'll go through some of those techniques that I learned in doing shorts and softs, and we're not going to talk about softs today or in DCS World, because the airfield conditions that DCS World provides does not mimic true soft field landings to me. You can land on a runway of grass, and I don't know if the physics really give you the actual soft sink in feel and stuff like that. So we're going to stay away from soft and just talk about shorts. Now, as I mentioned, the taking off to the west is an uphill climb, which is actually good for landing, because if you've got gravity working against you on the landing rollout, you'll actually slow down a little bit better, and you've got some challenges so you don't run off the end of the runway. Looking at it from the other direction, though, it can be really challenging, because you got to come in, you've got a short runway, you're going downhill. Luckily, if you do have to go around, there's very little obstructions. You've got to fall off over the ocean. It will allow you to accelerate in ground effect, and then climb up after you get positive climb speed. Looking at this part of the runway right here, I'm looking straight down to the east, not exactly east, but easterly, and you can see it here, but you can really feel it in the airplane. When you leave from the perch area of this runway, the perch area on the surface, and you drop where I am standing right now, it actually drops down into a little bit of a bump before you hit that runway down there. You can see, I'm going to use my mouse, but you can see the grass right here where it changes a little bit, and this is where you actually go down, and then the aircraft comes back up, and then it's going on the level runway or slightly descending runway. Now, like I said, it can be deceptive, but the uphill and downhill slopes are hard to read when you look at them from the side, especially if you don't have some type of horizon line that's straight. above you, and so it can be a challenge. So always study as much information about the airfield you're going to be operating out of. Look at the aeronautical chart, read the local area procedures, and talk to pilots that fly out of there, and they'll give you tips. Now, some of the things that I have found on this runway that actually make it great for training is its length. It's a good enough length to use to practice short fields, and you could probably get good enough to land on even shorter airfields, but it's also safe enough, and it gives us enough buffer zone for hazards that we won't have to worry about during our training. They can bite you if you don't respect them, so just pay attention to a lot of the stuff that we're showing you here. The grade and the slope is always a challenge at any airfield, whether it's a long normal takeoff or a short field. And then the surface texture on real airports, and it's not as much modeled in DCS World, I don't get any more resistance feel taking off on a grass strip than I do on a concrete runway in DCS World with their aircraft. And then the obstructions. The obstructions we'll talk about a little bit later, but when you're coming in, it's hard to read the terrain when you're coming in from the air. If I'm coming in straight here and see how I'm lined up on the runway, well, I've got ascending terrain beyond the runway, which is also something to deal with. I've got the uphill slope, which is a positive thing for landing, but for takeoff, that could be a challenge. And then these are the obstructions I mentioned earlier. And so, well, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll come in on the other side, and I've got the downhill slope, which is a negative landing this way, but I've got obstructions right here that are easy to avoid if I come in from the left, and you'll see that in the practical application flight that we do. So I'll start on the ground. Once I get in, I'll defuel the aircraft to 30%. I recommend you do that too. I'm using the TF51D. You can use any aircraft you want, but I recommend going up with the TF51D or the P-51 Mustang. And the flaps I set for all the takeoff and landings, all the takeoffs that I'm going to do on this airstrip, I'm going to set them to 20% for takeoff. Now, giving it a little bit of flaps helps generate lift at lower speeds, but too much flaps actually puts a lot of drag out there, and it'll slow down your acceleration rate in the real world. It does a little bit in DCS World too, but it's not, like I said, it's not an apples to apples comparison to the real world. So now that we're ready to go, we've got everything set, we're going to taxi out. Remember, too much flaps is not a good thing. A little bit of flaps is perfect. So always make sure that you have your flaps set and checked. When we're taxiing out, we'll look around and kind of make a mental reference of where our horizontal line is for the where the canopy kind of settles while we're on the runway. And then we'll avoid taxiing with neutral elevator. What you'll want to do is you'll want to have that elevator, you want to bury that stick in your lap so it basically pins the tail to the ground. That'll help you out. If more than one pilot are using the airfield and you're sharing it with others trying to do this too, then I would avoid taxiing on the runway. Just taxi off to the side and make sure you're listening on the radio or communicating and have a plan. So when you go to take off, especially on a short field runway, you want to use all available runway surface. You don't want to taxi in a position over the numbers. You want to get all the way down to the end of where the last prepared surface is, whether it's grass. So you want to back up a little bit or taxi back around, and so you can get a good longer takeoff roll. Once you're lined up on the runway, make a note of your compass heading first, because what's going to happen is remember the tail wheel aircraft, your nose until it goes down and the tail comes up, you can't really see well over the panel and over the windscreen. So you're going to have to look for something in the horizon or on the horizon in the sky that you can use as a static object. And I wouldn't pick anything too close because that's going to move pretty fast. So I usually look for a cloud or a tree that allows me to say, okay, I know how far that is and it's not going to come creeping up on me as long as I keep that static or close in my canopy. Like the clouds, they're so far away that I can keep them in the same spot as I'm rolling out. And then if you're on a defined edge runway, whether it's a short field hard surface or short field grass like this, and you can actually see the texture of the runway, one of the things I would love ED to do is to mow the grass on the runway a little bit or have it rolled down a little bit, because usage of this airfield would cause that grass to be worn out a little bit more and it wouldn't be as thick as on the side. Now when you're flying overhead it looks normal, but when you get down low you can't tell the difference where the runway surface is and where the non-runway surface is. So now 2 seconds of nose forward trim is what I use. You might want to play with that and see what you're using. Remember, you've got 6 degrees to the right trim for takeoff, which seems to work just fine for me. And then once you engage that nose wheel trim for 2 seconds forward, with this configuration and weight, and it could be more with heavier weights or less with lighter weights, but for 30% fuel, I was able to roll and get the tail up pretty fast naturally without having to force it. So I got the tail up. This reduces resistance on the wheel and also on the airframe, because now I'm slicing into the wind a little bit better. Keep the tail up, and it helps you accelerate as you pick up speed. And then just as the aircraft's about to run out of runway, I go ahead and rotate. And what I'll do is I'll rotate by pulling the stick back just about halfway. I don't want to pin the tail to the ground again. I'll pull it back halfway, and then the wheel should lift off the ground if you've got flying speed. Then once I'm up like that, I'm going to stay in ground effect to allow the aircraft to accelerate. I'm not going to reduce the flaps yet. I'm not going to, I'm focused on my airspeed, and we're looking out for any obstructions to avoid hazards. Once I have positive climb, I let it pick up a little bit more airspeed. I go ahead and start adjusting the trim. I close the canopy, and I switch to unfiltered air. Remember, we use filtered air on unprepared surfaces because you could suck in debris into the carburetor. And then, only then, once I have all of that done and I'm flying, I'm aviating, before I start to do other stuff, I've got the airplane in the air, then I start to bring the gear up before 170 miles per hour. Now, once you're up and around this airfield, you've got plenty of gas to fly, for a half hour to 45 minutes before you even get to your minimum fuel. And what I would do is fly around and look at all the obstructions from the air, get familiar with it. If you look at it out your wing, as a first person like this, it looks like a little tiny postage stamp out there. Now, as you're coming in, practice going both east and west on the runways. Practice on both runways. And as you're coming in, look for the obstructions and come up with your plan. This is what I did for this obstruction coming in from over the ocean. Is I'm coming in with a little bit of a dogleg right turn. I'm coming in a little bit steeper. And I'm also trying not to focus or fixate on one thing. I'm not looking at my touchdown zone. I am looking at everything, but I'm not focusing or fixating on one thing. Now, if you were to stare at this bush because you're so much, you're worried about so much that you're going to hit it, it would cause you to not really nail your touchdown point and also follow through with all the other disciplines you need to do. Once you're clear of the obstructions through your cross check, then focus on your transition to the runway. Look for your aim point, look at your power settings, look at your airspeed. Now you can see I'm coming in a little bit steeper than a normal runway. That's so you can see over the nose, and also that's another good way to transition the power of the landing downward instead of forward. So I don't want to float the aircraft, I want to plant it on the runway. Now here's how it looks as we're zipping by those trees there, and that little house and little I think that's that's the airport bathroom, where you can go to the airport bathroom. And then in my, I use full flaps as needed. Sometimes I'll land with 40 degrees flaps, but my short field approaches always use a steeper than normal descent for those reasons I told you about, putting the energy downward instead of forward and causing my landing rollout to be a little bit longer. Once you get to level out and you're waiting for the touchdown and everything, it happens pretty quick with this type of approach. Look at your reference points to get that 3-point attitude, and remember those from your taxi out and from your previous experience landing in the Mustang. This is why it's really good to have your FOV, and we'll talk about that in another video. Keep your tail pinned to the ground on the rollout. You don't want that tail to come back up, because that tail actually creates the elevator will create drag, airflow drag will help slow you down, and also the wheel will create rolling resistance drag that will help you slow down on the ground. And then once you're safely under control and everything, look around you, decide what you're going to do, reconfigure the airplane for the next takeoff. Remember, if you're taking off into the uphill and you're looking at the obstructions, the uprising terrain and everything like that, consider all the obstructions before you push and take off. Remember, every takeoff is going to be with the tail up, so you get the best airflow, the least amount of resistance, and you get the optimum acceleration. But when you're taking off in this direction, and I recommend you practice it quite a few times, always look at your low point and where you're going to fly out. And a lot of airfields have these actually published for pilots, for for those that aren't here. But look at the low point and find that and try to fly to that. Remember, tail up during takeoff roll, no matter which direction you're going. It doesn't matter if you're going down the slope or up the slope. Always make sure that you have the tail up. Now, for coming in, here's what it looks like as a chase pilot. If you're coming in, always use caution when landing at low airspeeds, because remember, you're coming in slower airspeed. You're just above the edge of stall. You're configured for landing, so you've got full flaps or near full flaps, and you want to avoid steep turns if possible, because that's when you can fall out of the sky. Looking for the obstructions like this tree on my left here, having the proper FOV and zoom settings will help, and I will link a couple of videos in the description below on how I set up my FOV. Some of them are a little long, but they go into the detail about how DCS World was designed, and the default FOV is a little bit convexed, and it's also a little bit spread out, and you can actually, if you've got proper head tracking or VR, as a matter of fact, if you have VR, you don't have to do this. It's all calibrated through the goggles. But if you're using TrackIR, FaceTrackNOIR, or FreeTrack, or OpenTrack, or any of the free head trackings with the camera or with the phone and everything, it's a good idea to go ahead and set your custom FOV settings for each aircraft. Most importantly, relax, learn from your mistakes, and be sure to have fun. And come back here and see the next video, which is going to be me talking through my flying on this map. I'm going to do multiple approaches, multiple takeoffs, multiple landings, and I'll have my controls indicator up. And you guys can also ask questions and join us over at 4YA server for Mustang or any type of Warbird free flight. We're eventually going to get to the point where if we got guys in certain time zones, they're going to go and start meeting on a regular basis that works for them, because not everybody can make it at 2100Z on our Fridays. That's just a general day that allows most of the people on the planet to get together on a weekend. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to like it, subscribe it, share it with a friend, and we'll see you guys in the next video.